the number of the networking that I do at karaoke is like nothing else because there's no better way to really get to know someone than by whatever they choose to sing at karaoke. And there's a good buddy of mine who works for a big Finnish company. And I was in Tampere outside Helsinki a couple hours for a conference last year, partying with a couple of his friends at a conference. And his boss says to me, Collette, we've known each other like 5 or 6 conferences, and, you know, we hang around a lot, but I still have no clue what you do. And I think that was the biggest compliment to me because I really just knew this guy on a personal level and business never came up. But, I know that, for instance, if we ever had the opportunity to do business together, it made sense that.
Collette, the way you build communities as a VC is amazing. And you're also one of the most creative and coolest person I've met. Collette, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Let's go back to the start of your journey. What was your first real exposure to venture capital? Was it when you were the founder of Redleaf Project? Or was it your first VC internship at Jump Investor? Or maybe something else?
If I'm really going back, it goes to 5th grade, which this is probably one of the meanest things I ever did. But schools do like they get you used to currency. So we did two things in 5th grade. We had the stock exchange game, and we also had our school mascot was the Gator Bucks. So we'd get like Gator Bucks for doing good things, and I would give out loans to people and then make them pay interest in Gator Bucks, which in hindsight was so vicious to do as a 5th grader. Um, but where it really probably starts was probably when I really got into um, music. So for reference, my background is as a songwriter. I forget if we've talked about this before, but I'm an artist at my core. I write songs all day, and I love to sing. And I grew up in Los Angeles, and I grew up around a lot of music executives, and kind of grew up with that narrative that you sell your soul if you get lucky. Um, and I really had a pretty acute understanding of how major record agreements worked at a young age. And being a very stubborn person, I kind of said, well, I don't want to give up all the rights to my music, but I still want to make all of this music and spend my life doing this. And so I said, well, if I'm going to take music seriously, I want to learn how to think like a music executive does. And in doing that, I found that music was a tech industry, and in discovering tech, I discovered that the closest industry in business to music was venture capital, of all things. The way that equity splits and agreements in especially early stage, like pre-seed, seed, Series A, run concurrent to record agreements. They're pretty parallel. Like you can think of artists like founders, you can think of major labels like venture capital firms. And it's the same principle if someone has to take a chance on something crazy to make something break out. And, I said if I can understand the space, then, I can understand every facet of what goes into a lot of different industries. So I think that's really where it started. Um, uh, I said I want to pursue that. As a side passion, I think I got my first real exposure through nonprofit of all things. While I was doing a lot of music back in high school, I was really passionate about international diplomacy and menstrual equity. And so I started this project called the Redleaf Project. We were a 501c3 nonprofit, and the whole goal was, bridging the gap between big organizations like the United Nations with small rural communities and urban communities that didn't necessarily get the exposure and reach. And so that was a big project. Was a big turning point for me because I learned a lot of the business behind it. And then I came to college, thought I wanted to be a diplomat. Um, Everything fell apart with COVID, and I went back to the drawing board and I said, I've been talking about this thing with music the whole time, and I really just want to double down onto it. And it's kind of a now or never type of thing. And I'm going to take all the tools that I've learned and the resources and apply them to good use. So it just sort of naturally progressed from there. To make a long story short, but I'm a bit of
Yeah,
a chatter, which is also why I'm in VC.
it sounds like you've had like this one passion of writing songs and music, and then you saw how like the world is kind of against bringing the real music to life and giving like artists platforms and the foundation, even like just money just to support their livelihood. You saw that they weren't treated well enough, so then you went and said, "This is my platform. How do I solve this? How do I make this better for the whole community?" And you found venture capital as a thing that will let the community have a major, major impact. And even as a young person, you were like, oh, I kind of started a small business at elementary school, and you were, hella young. Maybe I think when I was like 5 years old, I just slept all day or something like that. But you were an entrepreneur and you understand the world of startups. So then you're like, okay, how do I make the most impact? And you chose venture capital.
Yeah, it's not the path that I really expected to fall into, but I always joke to people I'm not very good at many things, but I'm good at running my mouth and eating. And I said, what's a way that I can maximize the use of that and, make it a very useful thing for a lot of people. Which I think that, there are certain skills that really apply across fields. I think it's always good to know how to listen to people, and I think it's always good to have a creative perspective on things, no matter what you're doing, like whether it's, biotech, whether it's aerospace, if you're curing cancer, um, if you're, managing a stock portfolio.
Yeah, 100%. So you mentioned that you had very strong qualities for VC that basically kind of correlates. And VC might be pretty tough for other people. It could be long hours. It could be a lot of different things that you need to do. So who is VC not for?
Hmm, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing with VC is it's pretty unscripted. A lot of people will say that there are certain things that you can point to, but the one thing I think is pretty common is because you're at such an early stage, there's not really much that you can prepare for, and you need to be able to pivot on your feet and want to lead a lot of those projects, um, which certainly isn't going to be for everyone. I think as someone who talks a lot, I think it's a great quality to be able to talk to people, but I certainly don't think that it's a make or break. I know a lot of very introverted, very successful angel investors, institutional VC investors who do just fine, but that common trait is, everyone's kind of looking to start something or, you know, get their hands dirty, kind of playing around in that space.
Yeah. What are some like qualities that, people have that really shouldn't be in VC?
I don't think that there's necessarily a quality that people should or shouldn't have when it comes to VC, but I think the biggest differentiator I like to say between something like, say investment banking and venture capital is one is going to be the kind of person who leads a lot of those projects, and the other is going to be the person who's able to execute on a lot of those specific skills. And it's not that one is better than the other, but in venture capital, I think a lot of it is being able to understand the specifics, but be able to take a bigger picture view on things and step back. Even in a specified portfolio, like I've got like some friends in deep tech, for instance, down in Southern California, we're right next to a lot of the defense industry. And a lot of those funds are very specialized, but even within that, you need to have a broad arching view of a lot of different categories. Um, Versus, you take something like investment banking, and an investment banking analyst is going to be doing, like very technical specified things. Um, and so in that sense, I think if you're someone who wants to be digging into the niches of the same thing over and over, I don't know that you're going to find that same utility in venture capital. But if you're someone that has that experience and is looking to take a bigger step back in an overview of the picture, then I think that's super useful to have. And on the flip side, I don't think that it's useful to just be able to take the high-arching overview of things because, if you know a little about a lot of things, but you don't have the capacity to dig into a deeper understanding, I think that's important.
100%. And really, networking with founders and VCs is one of the most important things. And bonding with founders is the best way for VCs to invest in the best of the best. And you do this by setting up events for founders to meet each other or to meet VCs. So as an event host, what are ways that you attract the best founders to events? And also, what are the basics to make them feel comfortable and happy during the event?
I was just talking about this with someone yesterday, in Austin. I think the biggest thing that goes into networking is to get rid of that networking component of it. I think the more personal you can make experiences, the better. And I think the best thing that you can do is when you walk into a room and no one is asking each other titles, like you drop titles at the door, then you really get to know people on a personal basis. And those are the people that it will naturally sift out who you would be wanting to work with anyway and whose personalities you maybe don't necessarily click with out the gate. The thing that I always try to do is I always try to curate and both curate myself and then seek out places that are less conventional for finding innovation. Um, for instance, I've sourced deals from everywhere to, on the LA Metro to, my dad works a couple days at a bakery. I've sourced people at the bakery before. Um, you find people on planes, you find people, of course, in demo days and traditional places like that too. Um, but it's that same kind of thing that, when it comes to bigger events, the most successful ones are, I'll give you a great example. A big pastime of mine is karaoke. And the number of the networking that I do at karaoke is like nothing else because there's no better way to really get to know someone than by whatever they choose to sing at karaoke. And there's a um good buddy of mine uh works for a big Finnish company and I was in Tampere outside Helsinki a couple hours for a conference last year partying with a couple of his friends at a conference, and his boss says to me, Colette, we've known each other like 5 or 6 conferences, and you know, we hang around a lot, but I still have no clue what you do. And I think that was the biggest compliment to me because I really just knew this guy on a personal level, and business never came up. But I know that, for instance, if we ever had the opportunity to do business together, it made sense that it would just be such a natural fit. So long story short, to answer your question on that, I think it's about finding people in places where you would naturally be getting along with those people anyway and building things from there, taking as much of the business out of it as you can whilst still keeping it um professional and goal oriented because you want to work with people that you're going to have a fun time working with anyway.
So would you say that it's better to just like take the work related stuff out? Or, when you're talking about industry, don't talk about like what you do exactly. Talk about like what's happening around the world. And your interest is that is not necessarily work related. Is that
I would actually argue that quite a bit indeed, because if you're in a room where you know that there's going to be innovation regardless, if you're hanging around in like San Francisco or something, or you're hanging, east side of Los Angeles, or you're hanging in New York City, and you know the people you're going to be around are creative, you just don't know who specifically is in a room. The best thing that I think you can do is try to find people that you align with philosophically. I'm not a particularly religious or spiritual person, but I believe at our core, we have our values, and you want to find people who, regardless of their name and their business, you align within whatever values that is. And that translates to everything. And the best way to indicate that is if you can, get along personally. I think that indicates a lot about business. And I think that builds a sense of trust. I think that it builds a sense of wanting to put in the work with someone like that naturally. And then the bonus is, you might just happen to have businesses that co-align with each other. And even if that person that you get along with isn't necessarily the specific fit for the kinds of business you're looking to go into, they probably know people who, since you get along with them, you'd probably get along with those people too. And that's sort of I think that's the essence of network. You surround yourself with the average of, what's that saying? You are the average of the people you surround yourself with. And if you surround yourself with people of that mentality, then instead of seeking for those things, I think that they naturally start to come back to you.
Yeah, and network, like you said, it's all about finding the people that has the same morals as you. And it doesn't really matter if they are doing something different or they like stuff that are different. That might even be better. The only thing that you need is that people who have morals that aligns with you. And once you find that, you literally have access to their network and also your network. And since you guys are so close and so aligned, you're like, oh, wait, you know, there is a person that I know who's a VC. There's a person who I know that's a great founder. And that's how you connect the dots. And for example, like you said, karaoke could be a really, really good place to do that. And that's one example that the audience can definitely take right now and then
Go to
maybe do
karaoke.
tomorrow or something after
Yeah.
like a founders event.
Well, and here's the other thing. When you don't ask people their titles, you end up talking to people that you'd probably never feel comfortable talking to in the first place. I mean, the number of CEOs and executives that or general partners, managing partners that I've talked to way above my weight class, so to speak, because I didn't ask what they did. I can tell you countless stories about that, and you find out after the fact, and you think to yourself, well, if I had known that that's who they were, I never would have gone up to them and said something. But it puts you on an equal playing field with people because we're all just
Yeah.
people at the end of the day.
100%. For people, for aspiring VCs who wants like ways to find these founders events, what are two ways that is the easiest and most common for them to do so?
I think it's about finding the spaces and being the most authentic version of yourself. Um, which is cheesy, but I can speak, for instance, to, how that example's played out in my own life because I think that I'm a pretty non-traditional background when it comes to venture capital. I studied economics. I certainly have an understanding of, the business and the technologies that we invest in, but I'm a songwriter, as I mentioned. And the biggest thing in my case was I wanted to walk into rooms and I wanted to be the songwriter. I didn't want to try to be anything else because that's my big end goal. Um, doesn't mean that, I walk into conferences and I certainly don't dress like suit and tie and I stick out, but I think that's to my advantage. Um, I'm also walking into rooms and spaces that I'm interested in. That can be, for instance, like people trying to break into VC clubs, hosting things around universities. That can be starting off with maybe happy hour mixers um, in your local town. If you plug in with, there are a ton of great local resources that, even if you aren't able to find the niche ones in your city, you start going to, like the bigger startup meetups and you start to find the people that you get along with. Or on the flip side, if you know specific industries that you're interested in already, maybe it's, consumer packaged goods, maybe you're really interested in um, like artificial intelligence, whatever it may be. Um, Finding places that just align with those kinds of projects, even if you don't necessarily suspect founders will be in those spaces, tend to yield the best networks. And then from there, as you start going out to places, you start becoming a known figure. Um, when I was in high school, I started off playing open mics and doing folk sets. So I'd, write folk music. I'd bring my guitar around, and I'd play 5 minute sets in coffee shops. And people started to know me around town, and people started to invite me out to places and said, "Hey, you should do this. Hey, I can get you a feature set here and there." Um, I started to get into booking bigger concert venues, and then COVID hit, but it built up naturally from there because I was just a face that people knew around town. And the second you know people, you are your network, and your value is not the people that you know, but your capacity to be able to go out there and connect with people. Um, and you're not going to connect with everyone, but I don't think that you need to connect with everyone. You need to connect with the people that you align the most with anyway. Because on the flip side, those are the people who you're going to be able to also serve and contribute to the most.
That's like the best part about networking is that once you take that first step to go to a related event, maybe it could be your local place, or it could be like a university event, or even like your coffee house, but it could be something really small, really local. But once you go out there to those events, you really become a brand itself. And that's why founders love to do branding for themselves on social media instead of just like opening a company page. And once they have that founder's brand, it's like people want to see other people's journey. They don't want to see like, an organization's journey. So once you have a brand yourself, people's going to invite you. And that is where you could get into even tighter networks or maybe even like private events for VCs, for founders. But all you have to do is just take the first step, just like Colette said. So for as a senior associate VC who's looking at deals every day, what are the top three things you look for in a startup when you're considering whether or not to invest?
Hmm. I think biggest thing is, are you solving a solution? Does the solution you have a problem? I think dozens of deals in a day, hundreds in a week. And you know, I'm really privileged that I get to chat with so many incredible founders. Um, a lot of businesses, being very honest, are not venture backable businesses. They're phenomenal businesses, but maybe they can be small family businesses, or maybe they're things that are a great tool that attaches on to other kinds of companies that doesn't need a huge fundraising round to take off. Um, and so if you're a solution looking for a problem, um, I always say, that's the biggest thing that you need to consider. Um, the second thing I think comes down to, are you is there a barrier to entry? And people always say, what's your competitive advantage? But the bigger question within that is, what's to stop someone from going out and taking your idea? A lot of early founders will, or less experienced founders will ask firms to sign NDAs, which a lot of VC firms aren't going to be able to sign NDAs because it's a lot of NDAs to keep track of, and it prohibits a lot of capacity to be able to look at other deals. It creates a lot of liability, so VC firms don't sign NDAs. But if your idea can be stolen that easily, that just by talking about it, someone else can come up with it, then your barrier to entry isn't that high. And, barrier to entry can be a lot of things. It can be the relationships that you've built up that are maybe difficult to access. For instance, a big barrier to entry in the music industry is just, quite frankly, an understanding of the industry and the capacity to get in contact with the right people. For maybe an aerospace company, it's, or someone solving cancer, something like that. I've talked with people who have solved cancers, which is so crazy. um I'm like, I am so not worthy of the cool things that you're doing. It's like the proprietary data and the technology or the discovery that they've made. A problem and solution, barrier to entry. And then I think the biggest thing that I always look for, because I always come from very creative capacity is does a founder have a reason to be in the industry? You know, is this something that you're going to be waking up and doing every day, even when, you know, the business doesn't look profitable, even when the business model isn't great? Are you going to be willing to pivot because you as a founder believe in the vision enough to stick with it and to see that through? And so I always ask people, you know, like, what's your story? And, you know, people will go into explanations on, you know, how the company came together, but I always want to know, well, you know, what's sort of the thing that gets you up in the morning anyway, and exactly did it lead to this? Which usually people have, you know, that story. But those are the three things that I look for as an investor.
Yeah, those three are actually really, really important. The first one, most people would just like not even think about. Like they would say like, okay, I have an idea. Let me just throw 500K of my own money into it. And then when a VC actually looks at it after they talk to them, they're like, uh, dude, this will not go to $1 billion or this will not 10x. So then we're not going to invest in this no matter what. And then, the founder, they get all sad and stuff, but that's just the way venture capital is. And for the second one, you need a moat because everyone's just gonna come in like right after. And then, if you have a successful company, everyone wants market share, everyone wants like to make money. So really, it's like people like having new ideas, but being able to protect those ideas is actually even more valuable. And for the third one, the founder is like the most important factor. At least that's what I think. But do you think that a founder that have deep domain expertise is better, or would you rather choose a great founder that's gonna figure out everything along the way?
Yes, I think it's important to I think it's important to have both. Which maybe comes to, you know, this is my own personal take. I always think that it's great to have a second opinion on things. You know, another big thing that um is always important to look for on early teams is that you have a technical founder. Um, you know, typically it's great to see that you have someone who has great business acumen and then someone that's got great technical skills. Of course, it depends on the company. But you know, a lot of what we do is emerging technologies, and so you want to know that your founders understand what they're talking about, but also that it can be communicated out. Because you can have a phenomenal idea, and if there's no way to explain it to people, then it stays an idea. And on the flip side, you can be great at talking to people and selling things, and if you can't get into the weeds of what you're talking about, then um, you're dead in the water. So I really do think that it goes both ways. It's kind of like the question that you asked before about um, you know, like the kinds of people that should go into VC and shouldn't go into VC. I think that you really do need to have both perspectives in a company, um, if you're going to do something well. The other thing I always say is, I think that you should work with people that you don't necessarily have the same opinions on, and you should be open to disagreeing on things because it's not about surrounding yourself with yes men, but it's about, you know, being able to have open dialogues on things and come through different perspectives to build something bigger than your own perspective.
Yeah. And sometimes people would just have like one co-founder who's really, really technical, and then the other one could be like someone who sees it on the surface level or on a broader level. So then they basically both balance out and they have ideas of their own and strengths of their own. One could be technical, one could, be not. But looking ahead, what changes in venture capital are you most excited about? Right now, LVL Ventures have, 20 exits, IPOs, and partnerships with basically every part of entrepreneurship. It's also a fund that backs founders at every stage instead of just early stages. So what part of traditional VC fund model is here to stay and what parts will evolve?
Mm. A lot of funds will talk about value add, which is a funny thing. Like if you're a founder in a conversation and you're lucky enough that, all these VCs are coming to you, a lot of funds will be like, we have value add this and value add that. So it's sort of like the big joke that um that's the big buzzword. But I think the thing that excites me most about the direction that VC is going is I think that it's starting to expand beyond just deploying capital, hoping for the best. A traditional fund is a traditional fund consists of, limited partners, maybe that's endowments, family offices, high net worth individuals, that say, I don't have the expertise to invest this capital, but I want to trust this to a firm. And, that's a managing partner who manages a portfolio at a venture capital firm who has that expertise, so to speak, to go out and invest that. Um, and there's not really an obligation at its core for firms to go out and provide much beyond investment. I think the thing that excites me about VC these days is I think that there's a lot more a capacity for firms to provide other kinds of resources to help give people a leg up. Which is also why I think that, having a creative perspective in venture capital is a really important thing to have. I think it's important to have, your investment bankers who I keep bringing up, investment bankers because that's a later progression of VC. But beyond that, I think it's important to have both the technical perspective and a less traditional creative perspective on things because it's great to it's a great feeling when you can not be, another cook in someone else's kitchen and sort of overcrowding things, but be another resource in someone's toolbox to help them expand their network, for instance, or connect into industries that may be harder for them to reach that, as investors, it's sometimes easier for us to go knock on people's doors on behalf of founders. Um, the thing that I think is going to stay traditionally, no matter what, is um, like that format of having it aggregated within a house where it's managed by a portfolio. I think that it's great, especially for certain kinds of businesses, to have angel investors or smaller checks, or things coming directly from family offices. But the format of VC makes it a lot more mainstream and easy to outreach. You can kind of think of venture capital as a public facing entity to a very private world that can be sometimes hard to access. Um, which is the big goal with the big goal for the stuff that I try to do anyway in VC.
Yeah. So for our audience, we really need to know that right now, since venture capital is going to evolve, they're going to start really to show why they're different from other firms. And one thing that Colette says to have, show their worth to the founders. And the way that they're going to do that is that they're going to be providing tons and tons of resources. And for LVL Up Ventures, you guys basically provide, $1 million of value for like each part of the founder's journey. And that's what makes you guys so, so good and what differentiates you guys from the other VC firms. So I have a question. Um, so what is your day to day like?
Every day is different, which is another thing that everyone says that I think is so cheesy. But like, what does it mean when someone says every day looks different in VC? Some days it will be a lot of pre-screening calls. It'll be a lot of getting to chat with founders who have applied to the fund, and looking at them for some of the different programs that we offer. Mostly for your seed fund. Um, but in the past, it's been things like for our accelerator program, and you get to hear people's cool stories. That if it sort of falls into the criteria of what we're looking to invest in that moment. Um, Some days it's helping, do support for the portfolios that we have. That can be, trying to knock on doors for some of our founders. That can be helping to brainstorm some of the go-to-market strategies that they have. Um, Other days it looks like reaching out and trying to connect with other investors for whether it's hosting programs, offering different services um, with other um, like offering different services that we can then provide within our own network. Um, and other days it's random troubleshooting on little projects that are kind of one-offs that you just think to yourself, this is the most random stuff that I couldn't begin to explain to someone how I'm in this situation or what I'm doing, but it's really important to my job. Um, and nothing nefarious. It'll just be little random things. I'll try to think of an example of something. And then it's interesting deal flow that other people will, send around and be like, hey, this wasn't a fit for my firm, but, I saw you on LinkedIn and I think that this would be really interesting to look at. It's also looking in a lot of decks, but it's sort of what is called for in the moment.
Yeah. And some days it could be like it could be just one thing, but then other days it's just like you could be doing everything just a bit at once, or even just like supporting the partners. And it could
Yeah,
be like really, really random, and it could be different for different VC firms as well. So that's why
exactly.
it's like, when I ask this question of what do you usually do at a VC firm, it could really range. And depending on the VC firm that you actually join, you should make sure that you do know in general what you do.
Like I always call them my talking days or my thinking days. Like, a talking day is, you take a ton of pre-screening calls and a thinking day is like, due diligence on a company or just like deep research on markets and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it could be, I just want to spend 2 hours on this, but VC, it's not like it doesn't have too much of a timeline, except if you booked a meeting, then you have to go. But
Mhm.
other than that, it's like lots of freedom, but it could be long hours too. But at the end of the day, it's like it's your relationship with your founders and how you can best support that. So the next question is, I remember you were in Shield's group, and what they do is they help VC firms with managing the recruitment process for their portfolio companies. Could you talk about how that exact process usually works out for VC firms and founders?
Yeah, the hiring process for different firms.
Yeah,
So for firms or for portfolio companies?
for portfolio companies, like the role that does it.
Yeah. So growth at early stage firms is really interesting because it really is like you understand, like for instance, take a big company that has, a few thousand employees and you're like, well, how do you segment like what exactly all of those employees do and what they need? It starts with one person and you get to see, how it starts with a single person those early stages. So, usually it starts with your C-suite. And a lot of, especially at the rounds that we look at, um, in those earlier stages, will raise rounds because they're trying to hire for market expansions. Um, so, once you've raised a round, for instance, you either potentially have people in mind from different circles, or you can go with recruiters that help, bring you the right resume so that you can recruit for specific needs. And, maybe you're a software company or a company that needs machine learning components and you need to find machine learning specialists. Groups like a Shields group, for instance, will go out, help you find the right specialists based on the kinds of people that you're looking for, and then help place them. But at the same time, every group is going to be different. I mean, sometimes it's adding co-founders, sometimes it's hiring on temporary like part-time roles for things. Sometimes it's full marketing teams. Um Every startup kind of has a different approach with it. But it's a lot harder to find people than you'd expect. It's kind of like a networking. Like, you look out at a big sea and there's so many possibilities out there, but it's just overwhelming. And so the idea when it comes to recruiting is finding smaller circles, people you know more personally, and sifting in through that.
And for the VC firm side, what is like the person that usually manages this process? Is it like the platform head?
So it depends on the firm. For smaller firms, it will usually be through the managing partner or the general partner. Although, if you're reaching out to a firm, for instance, it can be from, I always say, like any door that you can get a foot in the door in, even if it's like the back door, the window, wherever, will still get you into a building. So, I mean, you can reach out to interns at companies sometimes and be like, "Hey, I'm interested in this. Can you pass me around to someone?" Sometimes at bigger firms, there will be direct, talent recruiters, for instance, or head of X platform. Even if it's the person, making on LinkedIn or Twitter or something like that, a job posting um, are worth reaching out to. So, I always recommend for people who are reaching out for different positions, whoever you can get in contact with at a company, even if it's not necessarily the right person, can always help direct you to whoever the right person is. Um, and managing partners, CEOs reply, so it certainly never hurts. And they're not big scary people; they're just people at the end of the day with emails.
And for our audience, if let's say, you refer a person into the portfolio companies and that kind of works out, that is also an in for you to break into VC.
Exactly. Yes, it is. Seems like such an impossible thing to break into, and it certainly isn't easy to break into. But I think that you know, if you keep knocking on that door, and you keep poking around for any way in, you will find ways in. It's the people who are the most persistent and stick with it that I think find the best results.
Yeah. So for our aspiring VCs listening to this, could you talk about the key reasons you personally landed each of your VC internships, maybe at Jump and also one-on-one fellowship, and also your role at LvlUp Ventures? If
Mhm.
I were to guess, did you learn about the senior associate role from your time at Shields Group?
Actually, I did. That's an even crazier story, because I really stumbled into that position out of the blue. So I'll start with Jump Investors, which is a family office based out of Brentwood, California, in Southern California. That was because I had a friend that had been working there prior that said you should apply to this program. They're looking for people. It was a pretty lucky thing. Um, but the advice that I'll give from that is, don't be afraid to reach out and talk to people who have been through the program before. I mean, I've had from that job, and that opportunity, I've had people who have reached out to me and said, "Hey, how did you like it there? It's something that I'd love to get into." Um, and with all my past opportunities, whenever people reach out, then I can become a point of referral for whoever those people are. So it goes back the other way too. But I guess if I'm summarizing it all, all it really was all people that I know, which I wanna highlight that point because it's not just like, oh, I got lucky. I just knew the right people, and you guys don't know the right people. I think it's a testament to I was surrounding myself in those spaces, and I do think to an extent that I was able to create a lot of my own luck. I think a lot of it is luck, but if you set yourself up in the right places where instead of shooting at a pool and you're one in a billion, maybe you're a one in 30. And they're still not great odds, but I mean, significantly speaking, and if you keep throwing that in, then you're bound to land it. When I was when I started with Universal Music Group, um, I started with that because I'd originally gotten approached by a different branch of theirs. That position got filled, and I thought, I'm never going to get another opportunity. Um, Someone else came back around, and because I had surrounded myself in, similar spaces to a lot of that team, I actually happened to know a lot of people around their branch and was familiar with a lot of the stuff that they were doing, that it was a natural segue in. And then because I was doing stuff there, I really hit it off with the team at Universal. Um, I started going around to a lot of conferences and, you know, met a lot of people all over the place. And my world became smaller and smaller. And, suddenly, I'm traveling to cities that I've never been to before. And I'm running into people that know people that, I've sung karaoke with before, for instance. And so, the 101 fellowship was kind of another example of that. Um, uh, Paul, who I had the chance to work with, at that we had a lot of random things in common with music, like some of the artists that we knew, like even personally, which was pretty crazy. Some of the circles that we hung in, and so it was kind of one of those things of, well, we're hanging around the same circles, so we're bound to run into each other one way or another. And Level Up was definitely a testament to that. I saw that there was an opening for something that they were trying to put together, reached out to the team. Turns out, I had a lot of stuff in common musically with some of their interests. We just liked some of the same music. But I also happened to know someone else who had recently started working there by total coincidence. And so, because I was familiar with them through Shields Group, we got along through just a lot of niche taste in music. And then also, of all things, I happened to know someone who had just recently been hired. It just kind of seemed like a natural thing, um, starting to work with that team. So, a whole ramble to say, I made my world smaller and smaller.
Yeah, and knowing Colette for a while, at least for our audience, I think one quality that you can really take from this is becoming a brand in the way that, she's really just like putting herself out there, even in the one-on-one fellowship that we did together. She was like one of the most active and creative people that I've met there. And she's literally just like puts herself out to events, to anything that's happening. And I feel like for most of the fellows, like me and her, we do have like um
I
the
paid him to
ways
say
to
all
just
of
like,
that.
yeah, to just like put ourselves out there, and then everything from our network right now, it just keeps building up and compounding. And then now we're, like we have good connections with VCs, we have good connections with the fellows and everyone. And now it's just like we keep getting more and more value by just giving value first.
Yeah, I think it's all about what you give back out. My favorite thing is whenever I can introduce two cool people to each other. Um, because you never know you never know what people are going to start offering back to you. And that's certainly not why I do it, is so that, like people can offer me things. But, I just, if I can put two people together who are doing cool things, then those people know each other. And then, those are two people that I can, bring around to the karaoke at the same time with me, so to speak. I mean, metaphorically speaking, but, sometimes literally speaking.
Yeah, and that's actually like the best way to do it is to just connect people. And even if, they don't, hang out or anything like that, they don't vibe, it's okay. Like it doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
But if they actually do, they see you in like a different light and they're like, okay, so I have this good opportunity. Who do I go to first? And that person will be you. So
Yeah.
I know you talked a bit about how to break into VC. For our viewers who needs an actionable plan to implement right away, what would be your recommended 6-month plan to fully break into VC?
I love this question. So let's start with month 6 because that's what the end goal is. I think the biggest thing when it comes to breaking into VC is if you want to be a venture capitalist, you need to act like a venture capitalist, and it's like the chicken or the egg. You need to be one to be one. And so that starts with having access to a lot of deal flow. Um, Even if you don't immediately have access, you need to prove that you have the capacity to be able to go out and find, not only a lot of interesting deals, but a lot of interesting quality deals, which means, founders that you've personally connected with, whose stories you know and can attest to, people who are building products that, are solving real problems out there that have really interesting barriers to entry. So, how do you get there? If that's month 6, and then, you break into firm and then you can bring all of your wonderful network and resources. I think you need to have an understanding of why you want to get into venture capital in the first place. I don't think it's ever a good idea to break into VC for the sake of breaking into VC because, quite frankly, VC is a lot of soft skills. VC is a lot of talking to people and putting loose projections on things, but in an early stage, no one really knows what's going to happen with a company because you don't have the traction, you don't have the big financial backers, um, you don't have the global market audience, so everything's an unknown, even to the most seasoned company or the most seasoned founder, which is also what makes it magical. Um, I really wanted to get into venture capital because I know that I want to go into music. And I know that I want to be in a position where I can meet all of the people innovating at the forefront of music, sports, gaming, arts innovation. And not only would I like to meet all of those people so that I could work with them as an artist, but I'd love to be in a position where I can help guide whatever, that new wave business model is for music. And that naturally led me into VC. But that can be any sort of thing. That can be someone who loves food. That can be someone who wants to go to space. That can be someone who wants to completely reinvent the financial system. Um, you got to know the thing that you want to do, I think. Um, Once you've got that figured out, you got to start surrounding yourself in spaces with people like that. For me, that was learning what it was like at major record labels, seeing how executives thought about things, and then going out to music conferences. But as I mentioned, that can be that can be anything for anyone, as long as you're surrounding yourself in spaces with not only people who have a similar passion to you, whatever that passion and focus may be with adventure, but people who are actively acting on those things. I always find that the more you say yes to things, the more people will start inviting you out to things. Once you've got, a stable of find regular events that you go to, like Mondays, maybe you go to, like this one, workshop space that holds interesting seminars, and it'll be a regular group of people that you meet time and time again. Tuesdays, you've got a different spot. Weekends, maybe you've got a happy hour that you go check out. Become a familiar face. I would spend the next 2 to 3 months doing that. And once you go out and you start meeting people, start introducing those interesting people to each other and tell people, I'm a connector. This is what I do. I go out into these spaces and this is my interest. I know a lot of interesting, maybe you meet an investor. Guess what? I know investors. Maybe you meet, 3, 4 startups that you really connect with and you say, I have access to these really interesting people I'd love to introduce you to. And whether it's one investor, one startup, that's all you need to go out and start telling people, I am a connector. And the second you say that you're a connector, people will start asking you for connections. And it becomes more and more legitimate. And it's mostly legitimate as long as, they're things that you're passionate about and spaces that you really care for anyway. Because it's not going to be so fun if you don't enjoy the spaces that you keep hanging around. I'd spend, those first 2 to 3 months just steeping yourself in spaces, becoming a known face, meeting people and connecting people. Then once you started connecting people, start folding those groups of people into different segments and start targeting the types of places that you wish to connect with. In the past, I've made spreadsheets of, all the firms that I wanted to connect with to do scouting for, or, the kinds of startups that I really wanted to go in on future deals with, and saw the spaces that they were hanging around, like podcasts they were on, places that they were talking, and saying, well, how can I network my way in and connect with those people? And also connect with people on LinkedIn, all these people you meet around. So first 3 months, meeting spaces, becoming a regular face around town. Month 4, start targeting the specific places that you want to end up in. And month 5, start hitting those spots up. I'd start off with regular connections and say, hey, I really want to break into this space. I know a lot of people in your industry, and this is the specific value add that I provide within a niche that I know very well. These are the things that you're not going to find from anyone else because I've steeped myself in this space. And, you're going to get a lot of no's along the way, but you're going to find someone who recognizes the value and the authenticity in what you're doing and is going to want to work with you. And then guess what? It's a win-win because you've broken into space and also, you're able to provide a lot of significant value to those people that you've been connecting with along the way. And nothing is better than being able to see the success of your friends.
That's literally so solid. I cannot even add anything to it. So,
Just
right.
yapping.
That was not just yapping. That's solid advice, okay? So now for a few rapid fire questions to wrap up. A few words or a sentence will work. Ready?
Ready.
All right. What is the best book you've read recently?
Karamazov Brothers, Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Okay.
It's like an 800-page book, but he's such a good writer. It's just an intense book, but it's a really good book.
If you could invest in any startup from the past, which one would it be?
Um, this is a more recent company, but I love the concept of Hedera hash graphs. Um, they're they brand themselves as a blockchain, but they're something called an underlying consensus mechanism, which takes out all of these crazy timing assumptions and it creates like these transaction speeds that can apply to a ton of different industries, like financial industry. It can apply to like data processing. Um, it's kind of nerdy, um, but I'm like fascinated by like the idea that they have. That's my short.
Yeah. Please send me that name afterwards.
I will.
But what is your favorite part of working in VC?
Talking to people. I love talking to people. As you can tell, I don't shut up, but I love hearing a good story, and no one is more passionate than a founder.
All right. Favorite song artist other than yourself?
um, I love the Beatles. Um, I love King Gizzard. My song that's been stuck in my head recently is "Love on the Brain" by Rihanna. I just think it's such a powerhouse song. I could go on for ages about that too.
Awesome. That was amazing, Collette. So for anyone listening who wants to learn more about you or your firm or your music, what's the best place to reach you? LinkedIn, email?
Come find me on LinkedIn. Collette Tibbetts. A lot of doubles. COLLET. Uh, yeah, that. Can I even spell my name?
I will put it down in the comments.
Sweet.
Thank you again, and thanks to everyone who's listening. Comment a question you want to hear from our next guest. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to press the subscribe button, like, and share it with someone who's interested in getting into venture. We'll see you next time on Break into VC.
Okay.